Hey, everybody. So, in some of the things that we've been talking over the last few weeks, the idea or the concept of loops keeps coming up. And I just thought I'd like to go through and clarify the idea of what a loop is. And so when we think of like trauma or just the things that we have to get through in everyday life, so you could also call this conditioning. It doesn't necessarily have to be trauma. It can also just be repetition. It can be the way that you were taught, the culture that you grew up in, the effects or the influence of the environment. You know, doesn't always have to be like, trauma, right? But basically, a loop is when we have these neurological responses to something. We get some sort of stimuli and we don't necessarily process it mentally and we don't really necessarily process it emotionally, but we get triggered or stimulated, and then we go through a series of behaviors or thinking, right? So the easiest way to understand it is the idea of trauma. Like, you have a trauma that maybe happened when you were young that, happened at the ice cream store. And then every time somebody brings up ice cream, you kind of go into this state of like, ugh. And you didn't really choose it. You didn't really think about it. You had a series of responses that it kind of becomes a roller coaster ride. You know, you ride out a series of responses, and then afterwards it calms down eventually. And then you're kind of like, "Ugh, what was that? Why did that happen? Why does that keep happening? Why does that keep happening over and over again?" And again, our mind thinks that we choose it, but our mind, when we have our experiences in the past, it knows the stories, right? It knows the stories and knows the feeling. But the body had a very different perspective of what happened. And so when we go through these situations, that again, it doesn't necessarily have to be trauma, it could be conditioned responses, you know, that the body had to adjust, sometimes in a negative way, to be able to get through the situation, to keep things going in the moment, to keep going and thrive in that day. And so once the nervous system makes that adjustment, it starts to become easier and easier for you to go down that neurological path, right? So then after a while, it becomes a habit, it becomes a behavior, it becomes a triggered reaction, right? And so, you know, some of this we have from our family, some of this we have from school, some of it we have from negative experiences. Sometimes we just have hypotheticals that we might be trying to avoid, and we avoid them and avoid them and avoid them, and even that can cause a kind of loop. In the body, things like pain, like an area that might be degenerating, like say you have a chronic health issue, like you have a chronic liver issue, or you have a chronic kidney issue, or your knee is like something chronic. Um, Even that has a kind of loop. And so you go through and you try to treat it, and the body isn't necessarily responding that well because a lot of times the loop will override what you're trying to do to treat, right? So if you can break that loop, if you could break that repetition, then healing that area becomes easier, becomes more effective, doesn't take as much time. And so we have these in our body. We have emotional and mental responses that we don't really think about. They just get triggered. Even ways of thinking, they can get triggered. But we also have external loops. And these loops are like behaviors. They not all your behavior, but some behaviors, social interactions, how even maybe you interact or present yourself in certain situations, but also your ability to thrive. And I go to myself for an example. like when I was younger, whenever I would try to do something for myself, ugh, I could not do anything right. Like I mean, I just would keep blowing it up, blowing it up, blowing it up. But if I took that same task and I did it for somebody else, I would rock it. Like, I mean, I knew how to do it. I did it well. I exceeded what was expected. I mean, I really did it well. And then I go, okay, now let's do it for myself. It would blow up. And so, in that, there was some sort of triggered response or some sort of loop that when I started to do things for myself, I went into this loop of can't be successful, can't do things for myself, I'm not deserving, I'm not worthy. A lot of times I would get started and then I wouldn't even follow through and keep trying because even like it would start to have like how I felt about myself, how I saw myself, my self-image. And that's also a loop, you know, our issues with how we see ourselves or how we behave. It's not usually our choosing, it's a lot of conditioning. And we do a lot of practices to go through and help break these loops and unwind these loops, but it takes the work of intuition. It takes the ability to be able to observe and bring spontaneity to something for us to reboot or regenerate these loops. Our nervous system is always going to generate loops, but eventually, if we do it with consciousness, you start generating positive loops, right? The idea of having good habits or having good responses to situation. If you set that pattern enough, then what starts to happen is that in the time of difficulty, you have a positive response. You didn't even have to think about it, right? You just did it, right? And so that is a kind of a positive form of conditioning, right? So, yes, we're going to be addressing that in the aligning with a guardian angel class, but it's also in other things that we do. It's in a lot of the practices that we do, a lot of the oil work, a lot of the being aware of the body, being aware of what's going on in the situations, even using the materialization breath, like we do in so many of the classes. A lot of this is also about breaking those loops. So I hope this brings greater understanding to what a loop is, and I hope this helps to heal whatever area in your life you're trying to address.
Thank you, Greg. So, what is the difference between an internal loop and an external loop?
So an internal loop is usually a physiological response, an emotional response, or an automatic way of thinking, you know? Like you just have a conditioned response that doesn't really get processed by the brain. You just have a reaction, and then a lot of times afterwards, you go, "Why did I do that?" Right? I have an example of like somebody, a friend of mine, and she was dating this guy for a time, and he's a super nice guy, right? And so nice that when people needed something, they would come ask him for a favor. And in that, he would, he would set aside his plans, go through and help them with whatever they needed. And sometimes it might even take a whole day or something. He would help them and he would be nice and he would be polite and he'd be enthusiastic about it. And then after it was all said and done, and it was time to wind down and he was done with it and at home, he would start getting upset and he goes, "Why do I always do this? Like, why didn't I say no? Why didn't, he goes through this whole list. But in the beginning, no doesn't even dawn on him. because his brain is not processing it, his emotions aren't processing it. It's a triggered response. So there, that would be an external version of this loop. Somebody came to you and not even like gonna punch you in the arm or whatever they're gonna do. They just go, "Hey, can you help me? Can you help me move?" And he might have a bunch of things to do that weekend, and he'd go, "Yeah, sure. I have a truck. I have this. I'll get my son. We'll help you move all weekend." And you know, she said that a lot of times it would be people that he didn't even know super well. And, he's a nice guy. And so he would do it. And then afterwards, he was like, "Oh, I had so much to get done this weekend and I didn't do it." Now he's exhausted and hasn't done something all weekend. And now it's on the back burner. And it's because it didn't get processed. Right. So a different kind where it's more internal is, somebody might say something, somebody might do something, and all of a sudden you get upset or you get angry, and it's like doesn't really fit the situation, right? Like you get upset or you get scared, you get anxious, and if you look at the situation, there's nothing really here that would cause me to be upset or angry or anxious, but the response got triggered, right? And so we even have this in the body. Like the body might start breathing more rapidly. The tension in the muscles might tighten up. Your gut might tighten up. Your throat might tighten up. You have a little bit of an adrenal response where you get a little like fight flight. And if somebody asks you why, you're like, "I don't know." Emotions in your mind are calm, but your body is like in a freak out mode, right? Your body might be experiencing something that it's experienced in the past and thinks that it's in danger or not secure or that there's chaos, and it starts to try to protect itself or goes on red alert. And so um, going through and working these processes kind of helps us to live a life that we're more present in. We get to be more of who we are rather than what happened to us, like who we are because of what happened to us. And so,
Thank you.